Welcome to the Martinus Cosmology podcast. My name is Mary McGovern and I'm your host for today. And I'm in Stockholm in Sweden visiting Micael Söderberg, who is my guest for today. Welcome, Micael.
Thank you, Mary. It's very nice to have you here in Stockholm, and it's very nice for me as well to be on your podcast.
Yes, because Micael is a great example for me because he is one of the hosts of the Swedish Martinus Cosmology podcast, which is called Kosmologipodden. So we are two hosts together today.
That's right.
But you're the victim, more or less, today. So,
and it's very new to me to having to speak English at the podcast. I usually speak Swedish. Yes. I'm more familiar with that, as you understand. So.
Yeah, but we'll do our best.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Micael, you have known Martinus Cosmology a long time, haven't you? How did you get into contact with Martinus?
I'm 55 years old now, and I was about 20 years old when I first got in contact with Martinus. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was studying sociology and psychology at the University of Växjö. And it was a student at the sociology class that mentioned to me that Martinus had a very special view of existential issues. Mm. We were discussing infinity, eternity, where does everything come from, when did everything start, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And he told me that Martinus has a very special view on that, because he writes about that life has always existed. It never started, and it will never end. Mm. And I thought that was a very interesting thought.
Yeah, so it's a big existential question. Where have we come from and where are we going? Are we going anywhere? Is there anything after death?
Exactly.
What is infinity? For me, it was very illogical what the Catholic Church taught. I was brought up in Catholicism, that eternity started after death. Mm. And for me, it was very illogical that eternity could start at some point. Mm-hmm. So, at a young age, I was very confused by these teachings that I found rather illogical, although there was some very loving aspects to them. But yeah, I was very taken up with these existential questions early on too.
Yeah. I don't think I had thought about it that much. I was very interested in society and relations between people and psychological questions, but when you study those things, you also have to think about what is a living being, what is a human being, and what is a society. And then you usually tend to ask new questions that is very difficult to answer. Hmm. So I got more interested in spiritual matters from studying sociology and psychology, because I didn't get any answers there, so I had to move on to study other authors that could give me some answers about more existential questions. So.
Yes, because a lot of things are very hard to understand in a one-life perspective.
Yeah, so when you study at the university, they don't talk anything about reincarnation and those things.
No.
When you study psychology, they study the brain and the neurons and transmitter substances in the brain and observable behavior, and maybe some things like an inner drive or something, but on a very scientific level. So it's not easy to get some kind of good answer about life in itself, so to speak. So.
Well, these various kinds of sciences offer us answers in terms of weights and measures, but not in terms of life.
Exactly, and that's what Martinus says also. He says that natural sciences, and for me it's not just natural sciences but also social sciences, they tend to measure and observe and count or do things in a mathematical way, even if it's about the human being or if it's about the society. They do questionnaires where they try to understand the correlations between certain aspects. If I do this, then that happens, and they will measure that in a mathematical way. So I think I got a little bit disappointed in those sciences because they didn't have any answer about more deep questions about humans and society, I think.
So what do you think were the most important things you learned from Martinus in the beginning?
It's so many things. I come from an atheistic background, not like you, Mary.
No.
And my parents didn't talk about God or anything, and I wasn't interested in God. And when I started to read Livets book, the Book of Life, he was talking a lot about God and prayer, and so I got a little bit confused. What is this? Is it something for me, or is it something I can use to understand myself and society? But if I didn't read so much about God, I could anyway understand that he also wrote much about society and much about relations between people and how you were supposed to be to one another. He talks about love, and he talks about tolerance, and he has a certain way of speaking to the reader that allow me to have my own view. He doesn't force his view onto mine, but he describes how things are, and if it's okay by me, I can take it, or I can
or leave it. Like
leave it.
he often said, "Take what you can use and leave the rest."
Yeah. So I think I was very uplifted by the tone of his writing, his tolerant view of mankind. It's just that when you talk about Martinus and his writings and his analysis, one gets aware about how important it is, and how beautiful the analyses are, and so forth. So then again, I was interested in psychology and sociology, and when I started to read Livets book, I understand that he had very much to say about those things. So to start with, so that was what attracted me.
Martinus talks about two kinds of love. You mentioned love, but it's not that simple, is it? And for me, it was very illuminating and a great relief to read his analysis about love, because he describes basically two types. Of course, there are many different manifestations, but he talks about what I have translated as amorous love, for want of a better term. It's the kind of love that you experience when you fall in love, and you can be in love for a short time or a long time, but it's this state of being in love. So I call that amorous love in my translations.
Is it different from romantic love, or is it
no?
About the
it's
same?
It's more or less the same.
Because I've seen the term romantic
love. Yeah,
well.
yeah. I think you could say that's the same. Yeah. Which is not the same as universal love, which is this all-loving state where you love everyone and everything, regardless of any differences that could exist. You have no preferences when you're totally all-loving. So there were polar opposites, but in the English language it's difficult because we don't have these two very clearly different words for it that you do have in Swedish and Danish. They're two very different words, but in English they're both love and love. The falling in love kind of love and the other kind of love. So,
I once read a book about a British sociologist, and he differed. Is it okay to say differed between romantic love and what he called confluent love? I don't really know what.
I've never heard that term, confluent.
Okay. Yeah. But he meant that romantic love is almost about what Martinus describes as amorous love, to be in love, and when you want to possess the person you are in love with. And the other term, if maybe I get it wrong, but I think he called it confluent love, and it was a kind of love where you more reflect upon the person you are about to live in a relationship with. You think about positive traits and negative traits, and are we about to live together or not? What are the disadvantages? What are the advantages? And it's a kind of inner discussion with oneself if this is the right person for me, rather than just falling in love and not thinking about what is going to happen. But it's a more reflective kind of way of getting to know a person, and some kind of bargaining between your needs and my needs, and what are we going to do with this relationship. I think it was something like that. And in my opinion, it's something like Martinus describes, because we don't have that ability to be in love with a person for the whole life. It's almost just a few months when we are in love, and then we have to decide, is this the right person for me, or are we going to continue live together, and on what ground, on what basis will we have this relationship? And Martinus has very much to say about our ability to live together with other people in intimate relationships, I think. And that has been very important for me also, to be able to understand my own feelings and my own needs in relation to other people. And also I think I'm not that kind of person who like to live by myself. I'm a two kind of people being, if you can say that. I like to live in intimate relation with another person. I don't know why, but it's important to me. Yeah, I think.
Yes, I think it's important for some, and for some it's the last thing they would want. So people are at very different places in what Martinus calls this sexual pole transformation.
Yeah.
He describes us as having two sexual poles in our consciousness, which we have talked about a bit before on this podcast, but I can just repeat a little. That we have all of us, men and women, we have both a female pole and a male pole. In you as a man, then the male pole is dominating, but the feminine pole is growing. And in me as a woman, then the feminine pole dominates, but the masculine is growing. And that manifests itself in very different ways. In your feelings for your own sex, feelings for the opposite sex, in your interests, in your hobbies, in your attitude to society, and so on. Culture, yeah.
Yes, and we talked about romantic love and our ability to fall in love with people, and if we are a very one-poled kind of person, we have a very big ability to fall in love with other persons, and we, as I said, we almost want to possess them. We want to own them and control them for our own needs. And when we don't have that ability anymore, we feel like life is being more complicated, because we are used to living with another person and used to having a family, raising children, and it's something that everyone does, and it's expected from us from early on when we are young, that we will meet another person from the opposite sex, and we are expected to fall in love and stay together for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And then we can see in society now that many people are not ready to stay with one person for the rest of their lives. There are many divorces, and people are having difficulties in their relations, and they go from the one partner to the next partner. And some people are interested in persons of the same sex, and it was like that for me. When I was young, I understood rather early on that I didn't fall in love with girls. I had a certain interest in girls, and I had friends that were near friends to me, girls that were near friends to me. But I didn't really have a great interest in being together as a boy and a girl, and I had nothing against them, but I wasn't really interested in them in a way that I maybe should have been, in my opinion.
Should.
But when it comes to people of the same sex, I wasn't that interested either. So it took a while, maybe until I was about 18, 19 years old, that I decided that if I'm going to live in a relation, it must be with a man. Because that was something I could feel deep inside of me, that it was the right thing for me. And that doesn't mean that you are interested in every man and every person but it took a while before I met someone that I wanted to have a relation with. So.
And this was before you met Martinus' analysis?
Yes, it was a couple of years before I met Martinus' analysis, and it wasn't a problem for me. I didn't think it was something bad or something that I have to suppress. I thought it was rather natural for me, but of course, I didn't speak with my parents or friends about it until I was really sure that it was something for me, and it grew more. I grew more certain about it at the time. But when I came in contact with Martinus, he writes a lot about homosexuality and issues like that, and I got very interested in what he had to say about this, of course. So even if I didn't have any problems with it, I was interested in understanding what was happening.
Yeah.
So
yes, because it's a to be homosexual is still a minority. So
yeah,
and in many parts of the world, it's not well accepted. It's better accepted here in Scandinavia.
When I began to live as a homosexual person, it was in the early 80s in Sweden, and it is very much accepted now, but in the early 80s it was something that you didn't speak about at work. Okay. You didn't speak about it with your friends that were you can speak with close friends, but not
the friends on the periphery.
Acquaintances in the periphery.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you read about it in the papers, it was almost often something negative, and in the 80s it was very much discussion about AIDS and something. So
yes, when was the AIDS crisis?
It started around 1983, 84 in Sweden. I think they were a little bit early in the United States, but in Sweden and Denmark, I think about 1983, 84. And that's just when I wanted to start having relations with men. So it was a little bit frightening. What's going to happen to me? And my parents were also a little bit frightened, I think, but they didn't say much about it. But I think they had some problems with just that bit. So.
Yes, of course.
But when it comes to the analysis, it was very liberating for me when Martinus writes in Livets bok number 3, I think, and number 5 also, which you have translated.
Yes,
but not number 3, I think.
I'm finishing off number 3 for a friend who translated it.
Okay.
So that should be out by. Yeah, it'll be out in 2020.
Oh, looking forward to it. Well, I remember I was sitting at the library in Växjö, and I was reading in Livets bok number 3, and he writes very beautiful about a homosexual person who is very fond of a friend of the same sex, and this friend is then falling in love with a woman, so he drifts away from the person who is very fond of that person, because it's a beautiful picture about a person who has a deep feeling for another man of the same sex, but that person drifts away into family and falls in love with a woman. So I could understand that Martinus somehow understood those feelings and could relate to that in some ways, I think. Because Martinus wasn't married, and he lived alone, but he had a great love for people around him, and I suppose he also must have felt those feelings sometimes when friends in his early days when he was around about in his 20s. He had close friends, and they got married and drifted apart from him, and so it is a very emotional passage in the book, I think.
Yeah, it's rather beautiful.
Yeah. And I remember also when I read that these books will have a very profound importance, or what do you say, for me during the life. I knew that.
You knew that
when I read that these books will be very important for me. And here I am, very later on in life, and they are still very important for me.
Yeah, and I think these analyses are terribly important for so many people, because partly that they can understand their own sexual situation, which can be terribly confusing.
I think when you go to a therapist or when you talk to friends, everybody is having problems with their intimate relations, and they are concerned about their partner looking at other people, or wanting to have another partner, or they feel constrained by their relationships because they cannot do all the things they want to do in their life, and can't be creative and go out to meet other people, and but at the same time they want to have what an intimate relation also can offer. So we are drawn between different needs. We want to be alone and do things in our life that we are interested in, and at the same time we want to be together with a person and maybe have a family also.
Yes.
And this different needs within people is something that most people can relate to, I think.
Yeah, and I've seen it in a lot of my friends, most women who were very brilliant at the university, but at the same time they wanted a husband and a family, and then when they ended up getting the children they wanted, then they realized they didn't have time to study or write the thesis they wanted to write, or get a good job that would really use their qualifications, because they had 2-3 small children at home. So it was an awful conflict, because in a way they got what they wanted. They got their university degree, they got their children, but the whole married life thing was what they wanted, but it wasn't all they wanted. There's this whole creative side that there just wasn't time for. And not much nourishment for it either, if you're spending all your time with small children.
And often when we live in a relationship, the two persons have different needs. One of the persons maybe is fully focused on the marital life and the children and the family life, and the other one is not so into family life, but when they met, they both fell in love, and they thought they wanted the same thing. But after a while, they discovered that, okay, you want this, I want a totally different thing. But now we are married, and how are we going to solve this? And since we have this one-poled ability to fall in love, we tend to get involved with relations without thinking so much about it. So one day we just are in a relationship, and we have 3 children, and and it's not so easy to get out. We have a moral responsibility to one another as well. So we can't just leave the one person here, and I want to go and fulfill my needs in my creative fields or whatever. So people can live a whole life in a relationship that is not fulfilling,
Yeah.
and they can be rather unhappy. If we just have one life, what are we going to do? So now we have many more lives, so we have time. We don't have to rush into things. But
yes, and one thing I was very moved by when reading Martinus was that he says that none of the wishes that you have will not, I mean, I'll put it in the positive, all the wishes you have will be fulfilled. But you can't fulfill them all in one lifetime. And I've experienced it very much in the area of music and people having different levels of talent. And like the famous film about Mozart, where Salieri looks up to Mozart and he sees how good Mozart is, but he suffers so much because he's not as good as Mozart, and he's doing his best to be as good as Mozart, but he doesn't get there. But of course he will in a coming incarnation, if he hasn't already come back many times since then. But I experienced that very much myself, that I had wishes to play in a way that I couldn't play, and be as talented as the people I could really see had a talent. But I could see there's a time limit on the music education and so on. I say, I can't do it in the time available. I just can't, even though I really want it so much. But I think one of the things Martinus stresses is that all of these needs will be met sooner or later. So the mother who's got her children but still wants to do something creative in society, some kind of job, she will get the chance, but it might not be this life.
I think that's a very optimistic view of life, and of course I'm fully convinced that Martinus is speaking the truth, so no doubts there. And I can also feel the same thing you feel, that we don't have to rush. We can be patient, and sooner or later we will fulfill our dreams. I think.
Yes.
And going back to the transformation of the poles, one can say that the opposite pole within me, that is the feminine pole, that's the one that represents all the creative wishes or abilities, and our human desires, and everything that is outside the family life.
Do you mean our humane desires? Yeah. Humane?
Yeah, our humane side. That is coming from the opposite pole within ourselves, I think. So we have this contrast within ourselves between the normal pole, the masculine pole, which is my normal pole,
or ordinary pole,
pole, and the opposite pole that represents our human abilities and desires,
our humane abilities,
and also this interest that we can have with intimate contact with a person of the same sex is also coming from the opposite pole within us, who brings on a new understanding of people of the same sex. Because when we go back in history, men tend to be rivals among themselves, and they want the same woman, maybe.
Yes.
And they go to war to defend their women, or Martinus speaks of that we have to diminish the rivalry between people of the same sex. And it's the same among women. They have to be able to love each other independently of gender or sex. And so we will see more of that coming into the future, that people are not so sure of whether they are a woman or a man. They have, of course, a body that is a woman or a man, but inside they may feel something else or something different from that other people in their surroundings feel.
Yeah, they may feel that they're a woman trapped in a man's organism, or a man trapped in a woman's organism.
And it doesn't have to be wrong to feel that, but it's very confusing living in this society where you are supposed to belong to either men or women. So if you feel something inside you that differs from this, you tend to get confused, and maybe you think it's something wrong with me, or my feelings are more like women used to, or they tend to feel. I feel feelings that normally a woman would feel. And maybe I then tend to think that, okay, I was born in the wrong body, I must be a woman, because all my feelings and thoughts are like a woman's feelings and thoughts. But Martinus says that we don't change sex between the incarnations. We tend to keep the same sex during the whole spiral cycle. So we have had thousands or billions of incarnations during the history, and we stick to the same sex during all these incarnations. But mentally we evolve, and we have, as you said, the opposite pole within us that tend to get more and more space within our consciousness. And in a near future we will be like a double-poled individual in our consciousness. So we will not be a woman and not be a man, but we will be a third sex, you can say, mentally.
Yes.
To begin with. And if we go even further into the future, even the body will change, so we won't be men or women physically either.
And he calls that stage the real human being.
Yeah. And we talk about how many thousands of years, maybe?
Yeah. Who's to know, maybe 3,000 or so on.
Yeah.
Although we have seen examples, like, well, we haven't, no, not that last stage, but for example, he describes Christ as this, as a kind of being who had a double-poled mentality.
Yeah.
In other words, he was capable of expressing only neighborly love. He loved everybody and everything without exception. So there was no partiality. There was no Mrs. Christ, for example.
No.
But he had a male body.
In this
incarnation.
So
so it had to be like that, I would guess, to manifest on this earth at that time. But there is a later stage, as you said, where the body will be as double-poled as the consciousness.
And I think Martinus often says that in about 3,000 years, the mankind will have a cosmic consciousness, So all humanity will have cosmic consciousness, or the majority will have cosmic consciousness. And you can't get cosmic consciousness as a one-poled being. You have to be a double-poled individual in your consciousness. And you have to be all-loving. You have to be able to express neighborly love 100%.
Yeah.
And then you are ready to receive the cosmic consciousness, you could say. And that's why I think it will be another time before the body will also be double-poled, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine it will take a long time.
Yeah.
Because there has to be a biological evolution.
Yeah. Mm.
But I think we already see quite a transformation of the organism.
Yeah.
Like we see many women, I think particularly in Scandinavia, actually, where the hips are so narrow that they have trouble giving birth.
Yeah.
There are a massive amount of cesarean sections. And I sat on the train coming here yesterday, and I looked at someone and I thought, is that a girl or is it a boy?
Yeah.
And I just couldn't tell. I really couldn't tell. And I looked at him, her for ages, and I tried not to look, but I just couldn't work it out. And it's one of the first things you register with a person.
Yeah.
Is it a man or a woman? And when you can't work it out, I mean, unisex clothing, unisex haircuts, I still don't know.
And I think it's very fascinating because the more people we see with undecisive gender or sex, the more tolerant society we live in, I think, because it's important for people to be able to express what they are and what they feel, and to be with who they want to be, regardless of sex. And when we look out in the world, there are still very many countries where you can't be different from the ordinary man or woman, and it's difficult to be a transgender person, or it's difficult to be even homosexual in certain countries. And so I think it's a measure of how humane the society is when it comes to accepting different sexualities and different gender types in society. So Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavia should be very proud of who or how they view these people.
Yes.
So you just have to go to Russia, and it's you can't, you aren't supposed to talk about homosexuality in Russia. You aren't supposed to speak about it because they are afraid that people can get this information and become a homosexual person, which they think would be a very bad thing.
Yeah, and I mean, homosexuality is not something you catch from somebody else.
No.
it's an inner force that grows within you.
Absolutely.
It's not something.
But when you look into the history of Scandinavia, we tended to look at homosexuality as a disease, even into the 70s, I think.
Yeah, and even later in Denmark, it was the diagnosis of homosexuality was removed relatively recently.
Yeah, and if we go back to the 40s, it was criminal to be a homosexual person.
Yes.
And if we want to understand the culture among homosexual people or queer people, if we expand the horizon a bit, if we want to understand them or us, we have to see it in a historical perspective. How are homosexual people being treated back in the early days, in the beginning of the 20th century? If you live in a society where you can't express what you feel, you can't live as you want to live, everybody is saying negative things about what you feel inside, and you suppress these feelings, that will do something with yourself. It will make you have difficulties with understanding yourself and loving yourself and being yourself. Maybe you will find ways to express what you want in a way that isn't really so good. Also, it's a possibility that you are being derailed, or what do you call it?
You can go off the rails in a way. And
if you can't express what you feel, maybe you will express this in a negative way, in a obscure part of the society.
Or maybe you can get involved in misusing children and so on. And we've seen this so much within Catholicism that where the priests have to promise celibacy. And maybe that's the natural state for some, but for many, and I think probably most, it's not. And
maybe it's okay as a transition period, but
yes, as a permanent state,
no,
for a whole life. No. We see it goes wrong. We see that they end up having children with their housekeepers or molesting children.
So it's very important to have the moral within you when you engage in relations with other people, regardless of sex. But you have to have respect for another person's needs, or you must remain unselfish towards other people, so you don't try to get what you need on behalf of someone else. You could say.
At the expense of someone else. So yes.
So Martinus says that it's not the risk of derailment. Was it the right word? You can rule that risk out if you have a strong moral and a strong sense of
a strong moral standard.
Respect for other person's needs and what they don't want and what they want.
So maybe it's good to define what a derailment is, because it has many connotations, but perhaps one way of defining it could be that you use your sexuality in a way that hurts others. To put it very simply. For example, in taking advantage of children or whatever. Or it can be to all sorts of very brutal behavior. There's an enormous spectrum of derailed behavior.
But to be a homosexual person is not to be a derailed person, Martinus explains. And that's, to me, is very logical, because it's about loving another human being. So if you love a woman or you love a man, it doesn't have any importance. So as long as you don't take advantage of someone else, it's okay.
Yes. So maybe I could add that Martinus has described various categories. He calls them sexual categories: A to K, A B C D E F G H I J K.
Yes.
And of course, these are not the only categories that exist. At least that's my interpretation, that there are many categories.
Absolutely.
In between these categories, many variations and so on. But it gives one some sort of idea that there is an enormous amount of sexual and moral variation in society today. And my guess is that if a lot of people, for example, these transgender people you mentioned earlier, if they understood that they had this growing opposite pole in their consciousness, they would perhaps be more at ease with their situation.
Yeah, I think so.
I guess, it's only a guess, and I can't know, but I guess there would be fewer sex change operations if people could acknowledge and accept this growing opposite pole in their consciousness and not think there was something wrong with them.
I think so too, because we are, every man is not an island, I think you could say. and we define ourselves in relation to society and in relation to other people. And if I look at my feelings and my thoughts, and they are not the same as people around me, I tend to look at myself as something wrong. It's something wrong with me. But if I understand Martinus' analysis on this area, probably I think, as you say, I can understand that there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe it's I'm something very good. It's a good feeling inside of me, and I have a very good thought about this, and I shouldn't suppress this. And so I see a bright future when it comes to understanding people from very different sexual orientations or gender directions, and I think society will be a more tolerant and understanding society in the near future, I think.
Yeah. I think there's so much suffering in this area for all categories, for the heterosexuals, the homosexuals, the bisexuals, the totally confused, the derailed and the not derailed. There's such a lot of confusion and distress. So I think people will cry out for an understanding sooner or later.
Yes, I think that Martinus writes about this transformation of the poles. It's not an easy change for anyone. It's a difficult transition, or what do you call it, from something that we have been feeling for thousands and billions of years. We are going to change completely in our consciousness and our way of living, and it's a difficult process for everyone. So you're absolutely right there. But I think when it comes to derailment, it among people who are interested in this analysis, sometimes you hear that, I think that some homosexual people are derailed and some are not, and some are being homosexual too early, and some are homosexual in an okay way. And I think it's important for us not to divide people in those who are homosexual in a good way and those who are homosexual in a derailed way. I think it's not an easy way to describe what is right, what is wrong. But we have to understand that these feelings are totally okay. And when Martinus talks about derailment, he means that our consciousness have been unbalanced in some way, and we don't want to that one pole is about to suppress the other pole in our consciousness. We want them to be equal, and we want them to cooperate inside our consciousness. If one of the poles are too dominant, we are not a whole person. And that can happen regardless of being a heterosexual and a homosexual person. You can have an imbalance in your consciousness, and that creates a lot of problems for you, and you have problems with functioning together with other people and in intimate relations with other people. And so it's a way for him to describe that if this happens, that you, for example, become homosexual in a very early stage of your development, it creates a lot of problem for you, and you probably would like to avoid this if you can. But that's not the general state, I think, for most homosexual people in this world. But, well, it's difficult to explain, especially in English, but it's something I think about a lot, our way of dividing people into those who are too early in the development and those who are in the right phase of the development. Perhaps
one could explain how this idea of being too early arises, because if, for example, it could be a man who has a sexual relationship with a child. This child can have this opposite pole in his consciousness awoken at that point. And that's just how it is. It's like if a baby is born too early, prematurely, so it's born at 8 months instead of 9 months, you do your absolute best to care for that baby, give it all the support and help it needs so it gets a normal life. So if people have had this opposite pole woken in an artificial way, then an understanding of that process could really help us take care of people in that situation, as well as we would take care of a premature baby.
To avoid them to becoming derailed in certain ways.
Exactly.
When it comes to their sexuality, and because our sexual desires are it's a very important aspect of ourselves. So if that aspect becomes derailed in a way, it's very difficult for us to be on the right track, maybe for several incarnations. So it's very important to protect the innocent child, or so to speak, the immature human being as well. So.
Oh, time is running.
Yes.
Time is running. Is there anything you would like to add before we finish off this podcast?
Well, I can just say that I hope that there is a lot of English-speaking people out there who would like to read Martinus' work, because it's very liberating and inspiring and important for people to get to know these analyses, I think. And you, Mary, are doing a very good job in translating his work.
Thank you. It takes a long time because it's very difficult stuff to translate, but getting there. At least the most important volume about sexuality is out, and that's volume 5 of Livets Bok, the Book of Life.
And you were talking about it in United States?
In October last year, 2018. My translation of Livets Bok, the Book of Life, volume 5, had just come out, and I was invited to speak about it at a conference in San Jose in California. So I did that, and that was very interesting. And I met, when you speak at these conferences, you get a very short time to speak. But the interesting thing for me was who came and spoke to me afterwards and asked questions and so on. And I could recognize, at least my guess was, that there were quite a few gay men who came and asked me to expand the ideas I had talked about. And like, it seemed that they had got something new. So even though it had to be a very short lecture.
I was thinking about this small book
Two Kinds of Love.
Yeah, Two Kinds of Love.
It's not translated yet,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But
it's a very good book.
on the Martinus Institute's homepage, martinus.dk, under the English part, if you find where it says articles, you'll find various articles by Martinus on this subject. One is called Marriage and Universal Love. Another one is called Marriage. Yeah, that's what I can think of for the moment.
A New Culture, is that... it's an article called The New Culture, I think. It's not
don't
translated.
think that's translated.
No.
But also the Eternal World Picture, Volume 3, which is in English, both online and as a book.
Yeah, he writes much about the poles.
The pole transformation. Symbol 33, which is about the animal and human thought climates within us. There he deals quite a lot with this, with our changing sexuality, how it changes from an animal state, passes through the stages that we are at the moment, and moves forward to this future state of perfect balance between the male and female poles within each of us, and onwards to this totally double-poled consciousness and organism. So you get the whole story there in symbol number 33 in the Eternal World Picture, if you would like a quick, rather easy to read overview of the sexual pole analysis. And if you really want to go into depth, then dive into volume 5.
That's the thing, if you want to know all about the transformation of the poles.
If you want all the answers. And there's some answers in volume 3, which you couldn't get later this year.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in volume 7, I think he writes about...
all right. It's all over the world.
It's all over.
It's all over the place.
So.
Because the sexual balance is at the root of absolutely everything.
Yes,
it's at the root of all creation. It's not just to do with sex and human relationships.
I think he calls the highest fire for the wheel of creation or something.
Yeah, like a wheel that's driving creation, it's steering creation in various directions. So, that's a quote from Liebesbow 3. So you can look forward to that later in the year. So I think we have to round off now. Thank you very much, Micael Söderberg, for letting me come to Stockholm and interview you here.
And thank you for having me on this podcast, Mary, and thank you for being here in Stockholm.